working? Okay, welcome everyone to another random walk down Mill Street. Tonight's topic is like we had a few weeks ago, a find that I found in the archives a long time ago that I took note of and didn't know much about, and decided one day I'll have to research it more. And today is that day. I am afraid I may not have researched it fully, but you'll see by the end. It's not a major topic, it's a very minor topic, but a real curious find in the archives that we'll talk about. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen to my PowerPoint. Okay, and let's make sure I can see this. Okay. I want to make sure that you can still hear me and you can see my screen. That's correct. Thumbs up. You can see the random walk. Okay, great. So the title for tonight's talk is a curious correspondence and an angelic alphabet, which hopefully you don't exactly know what I'm talking about, but you will very, very soon. So a number of years ago, actually pretty soon after I started working here, so maybe my second or third time I was in the archives, I was just getting the sense of things, looking around, trying to figure out what's where and how the archives was organized, which is not very well organized. But I came across something that caught my eye. It was this. It says Enoch's alphabet. Enoch's alphabet. It has all these symbols on the top. I thought this is very curious. What in the world is this? It's the book of Enoch, apocryphal book. What is this thing? I took some pictures of it. I forgot about it until I was thinking about what to present for this session, and I decided to examine it a little closer. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what this document is, and then we're going to talk about some of the people that it mentions, that are mentioned in it. So first of all, we're just going to read. It's a transcription of what it is. I can't read these symbols, but if you want to know more, you can actually Google Enochian alphabet, and you will get a whole more than you ever wanted to know about it. But that is okay, better. And now, so let's just read what it says. So it's a handwritten letter. We'll see who it's from and who it's to a little bit later, but this is the handwritten letter. The above alphabet of Enoch and the following translation, literally taken from the following work, printed at Amsterdam by William Gorey, 1690, in 2 volumes, folio, with numerous curious plates. And then there's a word that I couldn't make out because it's ripped out here. Antiquities from the best historians of the Hebrews, Chaldeans, Babylonians, Egyptians, Syrians, Greeks, and Romans. Translation related to the aforesaid alphabet, extracted from the first volume, page 44 and 45. So it gives you a reference to what he's about to write, and then he has a quote, and he actually has little quote marks here on each line. The above alphabet represents the most ancient characters of figures which were used by Adam and his children before the deluge. That's the Noah's flood, and are particularly ascribed to Enoch, that's Hanoch, whom God took to himself, Genesis 5, verse 24. It is said that those letters were taken out of an old scripture, which was to be seen in Jerusalem at the time of the Christian princes from Italy. At the time, the Christian princes from Italy made war against the Mohammedans. So it's talking about the Crusades. 1096 maybe, I don't know what it's referring to. The Crusades. They differ, as may be seen, from all the old Hebrew characters. But for what reason? We go to the next page. Those letters, on the credibility of the importers, begin from under and upwards and are in 3 lines of 9 letters each. We truly cannot find out. So the author of the letter is saying why they go this way and that way and this way, I don't know. Can't possibly know the origin other than what we're told by the people who brought the letters to us. Then he writes, number 1, the undermost line, which is the bottom line, begins from right to left, like the Hebrew reads. Number 2, the middle or second line goes from left to right, just against the customary method of the Hebrew. And number 3, the third or uppermost line, again from right to left, so that the last letter above stands and the first letter at the end of the undermost or the third line as customary in Hebrew reading. I don't exactly know what he's saying, but he's pointing out, this is a quote again from some volume from 1690, that it doesn't follow Hebrew properly, but it's supposed to be the most ancient alphabet spoken pre-Noah times. Some think, is that what it wrote? Or maybe I got it right. Some think that these letters are to be the oldest and first characters in the world, and that Adam and Hanoch used them to record many things concerning the first world. We are also told by the oldest Hebrew masters that Seth, Adam's son, wrote all those things concerning and the course of the heavens and the other sciences that were useful for future generations to know, upon the 2 pillars mentioned by Josephus in his Antiquities, Book 1, Chapter 2, Article 3. I did not look up at Josephus, but if anyone wants to, they can. So that is a quote. That is written here on 2 pages with this strange alphabet written above it. And now we're going to find out on the 3rd page why this was written. And let's see if you can see it here. Here you can probably read along in the script. I transcribed it for you as well. My much esteemed friend, I did myself the pleasure some time since to acknowledge your friendly favor of the 15th of March last. If you skip ahead, you'll see it's written in 1814. So this is in January. So this is like almost a year before, 15th of March in 1813. With an assurance, as soon as my health could permit, I would apply myself and endeavor to decipher those characters which you so very politely forwarded me. And now, sir, I embrace this opportunity to send you the result of my research, which I have been able to accomplish through the aid of our mutual friend, Mr. Peixoto, who was a Chazan in New York in 1814. As the work from which I copied the annexed paper was in the Low Dutch language, as you will perceive by the translation of the title page of that work herewith transmitted, so as to enable you to refer to the same if that book is to be had in your city. So he's saying that he needed the help of Mr. Peixoto because he didn't speak Dutch. So he had to translate it with the help of Mr. Peixoto. On inspecting this alphabet, you will find 2 additional characters. I guess over Hebrew, I guess. I wish, sir, that I had the treatise you alluded to, as I should be able, having the alphabet before me, to decipher it. So in the letter that was written to him in March 15th of 1813, the author of that letter said that he had a treatise which had these letters, and he asked more about it. And so he's writing here saying, I wish I had the treatise you talked about because I should be able to decipher it now that I've figured it out. And have to regret on that account that my researches have not been such to answer your expectations. Having now finished, and as far as it was in my power, the work assigned me, I should do injustice to my own feelings, not to acknowledge the pleasure in receiving a letter from a gentleman whose company I always sought with those peculiar feelings emanating from a heart glowing with the purest sentiments of esteem and respect. My sisters desire me to present their respects to you and Mrs. C, in which I unite, and permit me, dear sir, to subscribe myself, your friend and humble servant, Samson Simpson, New York, January 14th, 1814. P.S. says in the corner here, which you may not be able to see. P.S. Please give our love to my dear sister and family and inform her we and friends are well and have wrote to Mr. Isaacs and have to her and have received, I guess, an answer. I don't exactly know what that means, but that's his little P.S. This is a letter written by Samson Simpson to a Mr. C. And now we'll see who it was, because the next page is actually the front page of the address. Reverend E. N. Carvalho, Charleston, South Carolina. Now, some of you may be familiar with Solomon Nunez Carvalho. Let's see with her. Thank you, Sherry. That is a word I will have to look up in my Funk and Wagnalls. Don't know that one. But thank you. Reverend E.N. Carvalho. So some of you may know Solomon Nunez Carvalho, who was a early photographer, using daguerreotype, and he wrote a memoir about his travels to the West, and was kind of the famous figure in American history at some point in time. But this is his uncle, Reverend E.N. Carvalho. Oh, the other thing that people know Solomon Nunez Carvalho for is he painted. There was the synagogue in Charleston, Beth Elohim, was it burnt down in a fire, I think in around 1825. I don't know the year. And they commissioned him to make a painting of it so that it would be remembered. It was a beautiful building and it would be remembered for posterity. And Solomon Nunez Carvalho made that painting, which hangs in Beth Elohim today. There might be other copies of it as well. Anyway, so this is the uncle of Solomon Nunez Carvalho, Reverend Emmanuel Nunez Carvalho, who was the Chazan in Charleston in this period of time, 1814. And so I figured we should figure out, what is this alphabet? Who are these people? What are they writing about? It's just a curious little find that I wanted to know more about, and so I'm going to share that with you today. So first off, I looked up the book from 1690 that was being referenced, and sure enough, it's available on Google Books, like everything. Back in 1814, when the author is writing this letter, these things are pretty hard to find, but you can just Google it in a second. And here's the cover page, and here, about 100 pages or 40 pages in, you'll get beautiful plate with the alphabet, Enoch's alphabet, and here's the Hebrew alphabet, and I think this is Abraham's alphabet. I think this is meant to be Paleo-Hebrew. It's a little bit curious and weird, but I think that's what it meant to be. And it's in Dutch, so I didn't copy those pages for you, but I did try to match up the translation with that, and it matches up. There was a few extra words where he starts talking about the letter Vav, which I don't know what it said in the Dutch, but that the author of the letter, Samson Simpson, didn't include. But otherwise, it seems like it's a direct quote about this Enoch's alphabet. But Enoch's alphabet does not, in fact, originate with the Crusaders. And I don't know when that myth came to be. In fact, this alphabet has its origins in the late 16th century, about 1580, 1583 maybe. I think we can even know exactly when it was created, because the originator of this alphabet was a man named John Dee. And this is, you can see here on the left, this is a manuscript that's in the British Museum. It's Sloan 3188. This is like a diary of John Dee. I'm just going to read you his biography. This is the first paragraph. He has a long biography. This is the first paragraph from Wikipedia. So it's not exactly an academic source, but it'll be good enough to give us a sense of who he is. English mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, teacher, occultist, and alchemist. He was court astronomer and advisor to Elizabeth I, and spent much of his time on alchemy, divination, and Hermetic philosophy. As an antiquarian, he had one of the largest libraries in England, and as a political advisor, he advocated for the foundation of English colonies in the New World. That's something quite interesting. Dee eventually left Elizabeth's service, went on a quest for additional knowledge in the deeper realms of the occult and supernatural. He aligned himself with several individuals who may have been charlatans, traveled through Europe, and was accused of spying for the English crown. He returned to England. His library had been vandalized. He was tried to go back to service with the Queen, but then she was succeeded by James I, and he was turned away. He died in poverty, and his gravesite is not known. So kind of a sad end to an interesting character, but he was an occultist, among many other things. And this language appears in his diaries from 1581 to 1583, where he is attempting to speak with angels. And he works with someone whose name was E.K. I forgot his actual name. We can Google it. E.K. was his scryer, meaning E.K. was the one who was able to actually uh, speak to the angels, and John Dee was recording all of it and figuring it all out. And this was the language that was given to him as being the language of the angels. And so we know exactly when it came from. It didn't come from ancient times, didn't come from medieval crusaders. It came from early modern England. And people have studied this language and determined that the sounds of all the letters that it makes are all in the same phonology as English, meaning it's not like a Semitic language where you have chet and ayins and everything. All these letters are able to be pronounced by an English speaker, which just goes to show you that it was being written by someone who spoke English. So that's the origin of this language. Now, how it gets its history, I have some theories I'll share with you at the end. I don't know for sure. I'm sure that other people have written about it. Problem is, when you start searching for these things, you get all sorts of crazy websites from occultists who still believe in these angelic languages. So it's a little hard to separate fact from fiction when you're doing a simple Google search. But I promise you can find a lot of information academically about this Enochian alphabet. But let's figure out who the writer of the letter and who the recipient of the letter were. So let's start with Emmanuel Nunez Carvalho. Here is just a few paragraphs taken from, I know it's a little boring to read words on a screen, but I couldn't find a picture of him. A few paragraphs taken from Dr. Poole's Old Faith in the New World. And he's talking about the Hebrew school of Sheretz Israel, which is called the Polynesian Talmud Torah School, which was begun in the year 1808. And he talks a lot about that school and how it was formed, but I only brought in the parts here about the first teacher. Eventually, in the spring of 1808, the congregation felt there was in New York someone who could solve the basic problem of the school of finding the right teacher. This was Emmanuel Nunez Carvalho. He was 36 years of age at the time, born in London in 1771. He went when he was 27 years old to Barbados to be the religious leader of its congregation, Idchei Yisrael. Because of his and his wife's health, after 7 years, he gave up that position. By the way, I read somewhere else that he was not liked in Barbados because he leaned toward the American Revolution and the colony's independence, and Barbados was a British colony, and so he was not well liked there. That may also have helped him move on after 7 years. He gave up the position and came to New York, where he set himself up as a professor of Oriental and modern languages. And he even taught Christian clergy. In order to encourage him to stay in New York and serve as a schoolmaster, the congregation took up a special subscription and raised money for the school, and a contract for Reverend Carvalho was drawn up, and the school was begun. In June 1808, the school was opened with 4 free pupils and 16 paying pupils, 16 boys and 6 girls who were paying. Carvalho received a salary of $800 as well as fuel. The trustees were they gave him ink but not paper, which I thought was quite interesting. And then there's some more. They reported that the Polynesian Talmud Torah School was answering its expectations. But in March of that year, in 1808 or 1809, Carvalho wrote to the trustees that my health obliges me to seek its reestablishment in a warmer climate. I have been unwell since my arrival. The enormous expense of house, rent, fuel, etc. I have found my salary considerably deficient already. This is in his first year of employment. The gentlemen of Congregation Beth Elohim in Charleston have offered me again the situation of their permanent chazan. And being lucrative permanence with a chance of my recovering health, he wants to go to Charleston. Ultimately, the congregation Sheretz Israel gave in and increased his salary, and he stayed for several more years. But then he eventually leaves and goes to Charleston. Dr. Poole does not talk. I'll read a little bit more. In Charleston was living his brother David and his nephew Solomon Nunez Cardozo, who we mentioned earlier. portrait painter and pioneer traveler. He served Charleston until 1815, when he became the Chazan at Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia. There, he issued his Key to the Hebrew Grammar, which was the second work of Hebrew scholarship published in this country by a Jew, the first having been Isaac Pinto's prayer book. When Gershom Mendy Seixas died in New York in 1816, Carvalho gave a eulogy for him at his funeral, and then he died in the following year at the age of 45. So that's Emmanuel Nunez Carvalho. Poole does not say one of the more interesting things about Carvalho. Right at this time in 1808, 1809, when he is complaining to the congregation in Sheretz Israel about his low salary and asking for a higher salary, he is accused of eating not kasher. He's accused of going to the home of a congregant of Sheretz Israel who is known not to be kasher and eating in his house. And there is a trial, and he is vindicated. He is vindicated by the testimony of his servant, his black servant, and it may have been a slave, who testifies that in the home, Carvalho didn't eat the lobster. And so even though there was not kosher food there, Carvalho didn't eat it. And then he is vindicated, and he continues in his function at the school. He also served as Chazan. So in this time, Gershom Mendy Seixas was already an older man, and could not read daily services, or it was too difficult for him to read daily services. Carvalho read daily services at Sheretz Israel, in addition to being the head of the school. Okay, that is Emmanuel Nunez Carvalho. That is the person who received this letter, and the person who sent it was a man named Samson Simpson, who is a fascinating figure, which we're going to learn about right now. Samson Simpson, here we go. Oh, by the way, I was hoping, I with a little difficulty, I was able to find this book that Carvalho wrote. It is available. We'll have to get the right kind of library access, but I found it. I was hoping that maybe he would say something about Enochian language in the introduction to his Hebrew book, but no, he doesn't. It's basically a list of lessons about the Hebrew language, and then some grammatical pages about Hebrew grammar. One of the things I just want to show you here, I like the way he transliterates ngayin. So yeah, he's real Spanish Portuguese. It's a ngayin. That's all. Okay, that's Emmanuel Nunez Carvalho. Samson Simpson. Here is a picture of Samson Simpson. The best way to talk to you about Samson Simpson, because he's really an interesting character, is to read his obituary from the Occident, which was published in March 1857. He died in January, as it says here. On the 7th of January, 1857, Samson Simpson left this life for a better in the city of New York in the 77th year of his age. Mr. S. commenced when a young man, after graduating Columbia College, the practice of law, but quitted it in consequence of a violent assault on his head by a person who lay in wait for him because of some personal difficulty, which injury, if we have understood it right, was nearly fatal. Thereupon retired to a farm at Yonkers in Westchester County, where he resided for many years and exercised the rights of hospitality to all who called at his house. No Israelite needed to fear of partaking at his board, since Mr. S. did honor himself by honoring his religion. He was frum. He was observant. In the course of time, the land improved vastly in value, and Mr. S., having sold a portion of it, removed back to New York 8 years ago. This is 1857, so that's 1849 or so. And has since planned various schemes of benevolence, one of which was the New York Jews Hospital. So yes, Samson Simpson is the person who founded, gave the land, and gave money and raised the money for Mount Sinai Hospital. Little did we think when writing our leading article of last month that before it could be set up and the type, the individual to whom we alluded would be beyond our praise or censure. So short and uncertain are our days. But Mr. S. had lived long enough to prove that he felt for his religion and did not thereby lose sight of suffering humanity. He was one of those who glory in the practice of their duties and love to succor the distressed. He gave charity. He died unmarried, We would thank anyone thoroughly acquainted with him to furnish a short sketch of his life, as the above brief notice is all we can give from our own knowledge. This is Isaac Lees who's writing. We may, however, say that with Mr. S, another one of the few worthies of the old school has been removed, and that not many among those now living are of that sterling stamp which induced this writer of this brief tribute to value him as a dear friend. That is the obituary for Samson Simpson, who died in 1857. There is a little more personal note from a biography written by him in 1902 by Meyer Isaacs, who was the son of Reverend Isaacs of Shari Tefillah. And I just wanted to read you because it's really gives a lot more color. And starting here with this sentence here in the first. I made Mr. Simpson's acquaintance during the visits frequently interchanged with my father. His father was the rabbi of Shari Tefillah synagogue, before it was a liberal synagogue, when it was an Orthodox synagogue that followed the Dutch Ashkenazic rite. Mr. Simpson resided in the early 50s, that's the 1850s, at number 208 Thompson Street near Bleecker. My father at 669 Houston Street, a couple blocks away. They were together quite often, their common topics being religious and philanthropic. My father was his ally in the foundation of the charities Mr. Simpson promoted, and together they went over the names of reliable men as directors. I can recall Mr. Simpson's appearance vividly. He affected the old-fashioned costume, sometimes wearing knee breeches and buckles. He was above the average height, very stiff and upright in his bearing. His hair was white and worn in long, wavy locks. His spectacles were of great size. His habitual walk was in short, quick steps, and he carried a silver-headed cane, upon which he would lean when seated. His voice was not musical, and he rarely laughed. He was exacting and even tyrannical, would not endure criticism or contradiction. As he was quite wealthy and of benevolent instincts, he was no doubt occasionally imposed upon. There were men he did not like, and he let them perceive it quickly. That's my favorite line here, by the way. He wrote a good hand. His signature was of the John Hancock style. He was precise in his religious views, rose very early, and spent time in his devotions. He prayed every day. He was so particular that he had matzos based in his own house. He was this is already in the 1850s in New York City, not just in Westchester. He was interested in prison reform and the politics of Westchester County, and especially in the religious and charitable movements in the vicinity of Yonkers. He was a great admirer of Andrew Jackson and preserved a stick presented to him by the president. He was a captain of a regiment in the militia, but it is not known that he took part in active service. In the practice of law, he was always considerate toward colored people. I find that an interesting comment too. I don't really know what it means. I have to look into that. He was especially interested in agricultural affairs. New machines attracted him. He was a member of Sheretz Israel and was a friend of its minister, Reverend Lyons. Occasionally, he was positive in his expression of difference to the management of congregational affairs. He was fond of repeating his recollections of great men of his early days, but there was no effort to preserve his memoirs. So that's a little taste into Samson Simpson. Kind of a old, exacting person who was a great philanthropist. Now we're going to learn a little more about his philanthropy. We already learned that he was the founder of the Jews Hospital, now known as Mount Sinai. Let's see what else he's involved in. After his death, long after his death, there was a lawsuit. And by the way, if any of you are lawyers, you should look up this case. It's quite interesting. I gave you the citation just in case anybody here wanted to see it. I'll give you the background. This is a summary in the Northeastern Reporter. So this is written by a person who was summarizing an appellate decision. But the basic story is that when he died in 1857, that we saw earlier, he left a will. And in his will, which is quite interesting, he gave a Sefer Torah to his nephew. He gave money to Sheretz Israel. He gave money to Beis Medrash Gavoa, the in Lower Manhattan, like the very Orthodox synagogue. And He gave a lot of money out to his family as well, including a large bequest of $50,000 in trust to his nephew, who could use the income of that money, but was not allowed to touch the principal. And when the nephew died, the principal was supposed to go, and here we pick up here, a bequest and remainder to any responsible corporation in this city in New York, existing at the time of the death of the precedent legatee, that's his nephew, whose permanent fund is established by its charter for the purpose of ameliorating the condition of the Jews in Jerusalem, Palestine. $50,000, by the way, in 1857 is an enormous amount of money. Enormous. The same amount of money was given by Judah Turo to Moses Montefiore to build, Jerusalem. Yeah, it's an enormous amount of money in 1857. And then there's a quote here from his will: by promoting among them education, arts, and sciences, and by learning them mechanical and agricultural vocation. So this gift, this bequest that he wants to give to a organization that gives money to the amelioration of the condition of Jews in Jerusalem, this is now the court case, does not pass to a corporation whose object was by its charter for the relief of indigent Jews in Jerusalem and Palestine. So we're getting very nitty-gritty about the language, but he wrote a will that said that it should go to a corporation that was purposed for the amelioration of the condition of Jews in Jerusalem. And the court found that that was not good enough to pass it to a corporation, which was called, let's see if I can get the name of the organization here. Well, here it says in its charter, for the relief of indigent Jews in Jerusalem. Seems pretty close to me. Also, that organization, which it did not pass to, which this lawsuit was about, was incorporated by Samson Simpson himself. That was his own company. It was his own charity that was not allowed to inherit from the remainder of this bequest. And so this is something that is kind of crazy, really, really crazy. Let's talk. We'll see a little bit more about it. So this is back from that article by in the Publications of American Jewish History from 1902. Two of the societies founded by him continue to exist. This is in 1902. Again, he died in 1857. Mount Sinai Hospital and the North American Relief Society for Indigent Jews in Jerusalem. And here the author is giving a little bit of, knowing the legal history, is giving a little biased description. North American Relief Society for Indigent Jews in Jerusalem, whose work has been quietly and unostentatiously done, and whose influence has been exerted in the direction of better understanding of the duty of Israelites toward their brethren in the Holy Land. The policy has been very earnestly maintained that while the poor should be assisted, relief should not take the form of almsgiving. This is exactly what's at issue in the case that was decided against this organization. Where that has been indispensable, meaning if there were people who really, really needed cash, they limited it to aged and widows and orphans. But otherwise, they dispensed charity to enable people to work and not to build up Israel and Jerusalem, and not direct charity to the poor. That's what he says anyway. Mr. Simpson appreciated the necessity of a change and thought it could be accomplished through the medium of the society of which he was president until his death. This was a North American Relief Society for Indigent Jews in Jerusalem. But the ability of the society was abridged and straightened by straitened means. There was a strange blunder in the dictation of a bequest of $50,000 in favor of that society. On his death, Mr. Simpson's nephew, during whose life the income was set apart for his support, the principal became available and was claimed by the society. When his nephew died, this society said, "Okay, comes to us," as everyone expected. But there was another person who was the heir of his niece, who was the person who would inherit all the remainder of his estate, who sued and said that his will did not go toward the North American Relief Society of Indigent Jews because it was written differently. And it all comes down to this language, amelioration of the condition of the Jews of Jerusalem. Now, the reason that the language is used by Samson Simpson instead of whatever was written in his own charter for his own charity, the Relief Society for Indigent Jews in Jerusalem, was because of Judah Turo's bequest of $50,000 just a few years earlier, where he lifted the language directly from his will, where Turo writes, "My earnest wish to cooperate with Moses Montefiore in endeavoring to ameliorate the condition of our unfortunate brethren in the Holy Land." Now, this language meant that there was a distinction in the law between charity, a bequest that would go toward a charity, meaning giving cash to somebody, and a bequest that would go towards building up organizations or things like that. Today we just call them all charity, but almsgiving was different than amelioration, and the court found that because of the language it used, it could not be inherited by the organization of which he was president. Really sad, really, really, really sad. Here, let's see, $1 in 1857 is equivalent to purchasing power of $33 today. Thank you for 3,000. Okay, so what's the number? Give me the number. What's $50,000 in 1857 in 2022 dollars? I think it's a lot. Whatever it is, it's a lot. But thank you for getting that data for us, Sherry. So that's Samson Simpson. Let's see what else I have for you here. So there is today in Sheretz Israel a piece of Samson Simpson. It says Solomon Simpson here, but actually it was Samson Simpson, who gave a Birkat Kohanim set, the laver and the pitcher that's used, or the bowl that's used to wash the hands of the Kohanim before the Duchan on Yom Tov. And here it is. We still use this. At least we use these two pieces. This piece, which is beautiful as it is and as historic as it is, went missing in the 1990s, or the early 2000s, late 1990s, and it's considered stolen. It's the type of thing that you don't use it every day. We only duchan, unlike other Sephardim, we only duchan at the Shalosh Regalim. So after one of the holidays, it got put away, and then the next holiday they went to take it out, and it wasn't there anymore. And we don't know who has it. We don't know what happened to it. Every once in a while, I'll ask people at Sotheby's if they've seen this come up for auction or anything like that, but nobody knows. My guess is it was stolen to sold to an antique dealer and gone forever. But who knows? Maybe it'll turn up one day. Samson Simpson. So that is my spiel. I want to just go back to the original page. So what is this? I think there is some significance. It's not just a curious thing. It shows you what the correspondence was between learned people in New York in the early 19th century. This is 1814. He's writing this letter responding to an 1813 letter from Carvalho. And there is one thing that I didn't mention yet, which I think will be the key. This alphabet is used as a cipher, and it's not just occultists and people who believe in alchemy or strange things like that. It's also used, I want to say ritually, though that's not really the right word. It's used in the rites of the Scottish rite of the Masons, which a lot of Jews in New York and America were members of, including Samson Simpson. I tried to find out if Emmanuel Carvalho was a Mason. I could not. But I would not be surprised if the treatise, or what was the language he used, Yeah, the treatise that he alluded to when he wrote to Samson Simpson originally was something related to the Masons. And that there's no indication of that, but it may be not just Semitics that is of interest here, but also Masonry as well. In fact, I would be surprised if it weren't, because the Enochian alphabet was used in degrees of Masonry to reveal certain secrets or something like that. Again, I'd need to ask a Mason of a certain level to actually explain it to me. But that's my presentation for you tonight. I'm going to stop the share. Hope you enjoyed. I'm now going to, let's see here, stop the recording and let everybody say hello to each